Hey, it's a big old pile of money. Welcome to the channel. The channel has been consistently about learning about how to invest so that it's applicable to everyone. Today's topic is frankly slightly different. This is going to be about physician finance, specifically for physicians, but also for high income individuals. It's going to talk about contracts as well as how to invest and just different types of investments and insurance that people should carry. It might be interesting if you've never known how physicians or providers get paid. At the end, there's going to be a bonus about continuing to watch the pile of money grow. But let's get into the presentation. So, different topics that are going to be presented in this. One is going to be calculations. If you're not new to the channel, you've seen us do calculations as we track $25 weekly investments grow. But this is going to be a little different because the values are just going to be a little higher. Contracts. So, different reviewers. We're going to be talking about different types of investments as well, stocks, bonds, other types of assets, and then different types of retirement accounts and taxes, and why this actually makes a whole lot of sense and actually matters, maybe even arguably a little bit more. Insurance, disability insurance, different types of professional insurances you should hold, maybe changes in either auto or home policies that you might want to think about, and then insurance for work and what those mean. Student loans, different programs. A lot of this at the time of recording is going to be kind of in flux still. This is in January of 2025, and so we will see things kind of as they evolve from this program. And then other types of loans, so home loans, auto loans, things like that. And then we'll provide a real world scenario of what somebody actually does, in addition to how providers get paid. There's a production based model, there's different types, there's salary model, we'll go over it, and something called work RVUs or WRVUs, and what that means and how you can think about these things. And then other resources in addition to a bonus to see where we're currently at with the pile of money. So, what is finance? Making money, investing for growth, and keeping what you gain. That's just kind of how I think about it. But as far as like what finance actually is, it's a pretty broad term. And really, it's about money management and then the actual process of acquiring needed funds in order to be able to manage it. So there's individuals, businesses, governments, they all think about these things. But we're going to be focusing more as kind of like the mission of the channel on personal finance. So some calculations. If you are not new to the channel, you definitely have seen this before, but we're going to be talking about it a little differently. What do I mean by that? Well, we're going to start with age 30. And why? Because if you're a physician, in the United States at least, that means more than likely you've went to 4 years of undergraduate education, followed by 4 years of medical school, followed by residency, which minimally is 3 years. Anywhere from 3 to 7 years are pretty typical for most residencies, potentially followed by additional training called fellowship before you start to become an attending. An attending is where those are the providers that actually have higher salaries. When you're in residency, you do earn a salary, but you could be in your 5th year in a surgery residency, depending on the location, where you are located in the country, and then also just what your program is, making somewhere between like $50,000 and $70,000 a year, potentially more. Unfortunately, possibly less. And then when do you plan to retire? Let's just start with 60. 30-year working career, 30 to 60, and let's say you start with nothing. You have no money at all in investments. How much are you going to contribute a month? Well, this is where we can debate this. You'll see, again, on the channel, we've done $25 a week for just watching that, seeing how that grows, seeing that it's possible. But what do physicians actually do? Well, physicians are pretty notoriously horrible with money. However, what could you do? Well, Medscape has probably the most accurate median salary for different types of physicians and specialties that exists, at least as far as I'm aware over the last decade. And so let's say you're making anywhere from two to 250,000 to 500, 750,000. It just depends on your specialty. If you're making $300,000, um, there's no reason that you could not contribute, in my mind, $10,000 per month to investments. You could do more, you could do less. It really just depends on you. And let's do 8%. However, acknowledging that 10 to 12% on average is the 30-year annualized return of the S&P 500. The S&P 500 is a grouping of the 500 most profitable businesses in the United States. But let's say you do 8% annualized return, even less than what is predicted for the S&P. And that gets you to about $14.9 million, which is pretty substantial. You put in 3.6 million over that time, and it grew 11.3 million, which is amazing. Let's say though you want to work till 62. Let's say you only put in 8,000. $8,000 a month? That's not nothing. That's 72 grand a year. 8 times 12. And let's say you get 9% though. So you get 9%. You have nothing though. You put in eight grand a month and you work for 32 years. $17 million. Okay. Let's say you put 10,000 again. Let's say you retired at 65. Okay. 29 million. And really, these can be adjusted in any way you can think of. Now, when you go down here and you see like, oh, if you gave up, coffee, what could you get? Another 300 grand is not really going to matter a lot if you have $29 million, just honestly. So drink your coffee, I guess. But the thing that matters the most is the growth. I mean, if you go ahead and you put your money into a checking account, it's order a fraction of a percent, like you're just not making as much as you could, that is going to matter a whole lot more than whether or not you have, avocado toast or whatever you're going to do going out to the movies. Is it good to have discipline, and is that truly the most important thing? Yes, because I know people even that have 300,000 plus salaries where they live paycheck to paycheck, and it's really unfortunate. Now, the other thing I've had people say in presentations before is, yeah, well, that's all well and good, $29 million, but that's not going to be worth, you know, that in 35 years. You're right. It might not. It probably won't. If anything, I would say it very likely won't. In today's dollars, it might even be worth half or less. Um, maybe even a third of what it is. And so it makes it even though more important that you start investing early, because if you're going to have less, the idea is not to worry about saving at all. If anything, you should be more concerned about it and start earlier, especially if you can't save this amount. And so that's something to kind of think about as well. So, moving on, we'll talk about contracts next. So there's lots of different things other than total dollar amount for contracts. CME is continuing medical education. There's continuing law education. There's plenty of different professional things that are needed for licensing, other things to keep current to be able to practice. And if your contract allows you to have money for those funds, maybe they pay for your boards, maybe they do X, Y, or Z. It's something that they're paying for that otherwise you would have to necessarily pay for. So that should be viewed as part of your contract and part of your salary. Retirement. There's a whole lot of different things for retirement. When can I contribute? Some companies, health systems that you work for, they'll say, oh, you can only contribute after you've been here for a year. Some let you do it right away. Some don't even have retirement. And so you can't contribute at all to a 401k. So there's different options we'll talk about, but these are different important things. Matching. If you put in a percentage of your paycheck, are they going to give you funds for doing that? Some do, some don't. Some do a lot. Some do a 2-to-1 match. Some do, if you put in 6%, they'll put in 3%, things like that, up to a certain dollar amount. And then is there a investment period? You'll hear a term potentially called golden handcuffs. It's not just related to this, but let's say they put in 10 grand a year for you. in your retirement account. But you can't get access to all of that until you've been there for 3 years or 5 years or even longer. Those are things to kind of consider in your contracts. Relocation monies. What does that mean? Let's say you finish residency and then you take a position 5 hours away and you have a whole house. Say you got a family to move. You gonna do that yourself? Are you gonna be able to? And then, that's an expensive move. That's something that might be able to be negotiated or worked into a contract. That could be quite a bit of money. And then something that's outside of money is what's your oversight? What's your schedule control? How long is your contract? Are there ways to leave a contract by you or your employer or both parties? And so knowing what restrictions, do you have a non-compete? How long is it? How many miles is it? Things like that are extremely important. And so I put likely it's important to have a professional reviewer. I know people have went through this service called Contract Diagnostics, not necessarily endorsing them, but um, here's my kind of free go ahead and look into them. I have heard that they've given some pretty good benefits. But there's also a list of people on the White Coat Investor. The White Coat Investor is one of the resources that you'll see at the end for this presentation. And they go through and vet people every so often, make sure that they're still kind of following their mission for it. They do get paid for it, just full disclosure. But you might want a specific contract reviewer or attorney that files and looks at, hundreds, if not thousands, of provider contracts every year to sit in your corner and to either review it for you or to help negotiate on your behalf. Now let's shift back and kind of talk about investing a little bit more. So, again, physicians notoriously are horrible with money. And do you think it's because they can't understand this? Not necessarily. It's at no point in your training are you ever taught this, which is what it is. But let's talk about like even just basically what's a stock? What's a bond? What's other things? Stocks. Here's a definition. The capital raised by a business or corporation through the issue and subscription of shares. What does that even mean? So, a company makes money. They do it through a variety of ways. Either they sell ads or they sell a product and people buy that product, they give them money. There's margin in that, means they maybe make the product for less than what they sell it for, and the difference is their profit. Well, they have a lot of different things that they have to buy. They might buy buildings, they might, employ people, so they have to have people on payroll, things like that. But ultimately, if the business is worth more money, then the price of their stock will go up. When you are investing, it's not like you're gambling. You're not putting it on black or red. You're not trying to have less than 50% chance that you're going to make money. You're putting money into some of the most profitable companies in the history of the world. And your, I guess, bet is that this is going to increase, hopefully, over time. You just saw a huge price increase on a lot of goods and services. Uh, Inflation went up, and the increase of the goods and services outpaced inflation. All of that is companies enjoying more profits, which for the consumer is not a great thing, arguably, but it is something that stock prices uh, will continue to rise. Bonds. What are bonds? They're an IOU. So, IOU, what does that mean? Like, okay, I'm going to give the government or a company money. And I'll say, here's 20 bucks. Give me $25 in 5 years. That is essentially what a bond is. You give them money, they give you back money with interest. And there's lots of different types. And we'll talk about different types of like stock investments and other things too. ETFs. ETFs are exchange traded funds. They're very similar to mutual funds. The nuanced differences are kind of outside of this level of presentation right now. But basically, it's a collection of stocks. To do an individual stock like Apple or Nvidia or Enron, not that that's around right now, but or Chipotle. I mean, there are lots of stocks that can rise and fall. Uh, by buying something like an ETF, you de-risk a little bit your portfolio. Now you're still only in stocks if you're buying like a total market mutual fund or a total market ETF. But something like VTI that we track on this channel is a combination of all the US stocks in the stock market. There's like over like 4,400 last time I looked, something like that, stocks that you own, and they have different percentages that they get weighted. There's different structures for these, but that is something that reasonably over time I would expect to increase in value. You can do real estate. People have a combination of investments and types that they want to do. Specifically, there are different structures for accounts. We call like asset allocation. There's asset location, keeping it in different types of investments like a 401k or a brokerage or an IRA or things like that. And if you're not sure of what to do, that's okay. There's lots of different structures that make a whole lot of sense. Again, the White Coat Investor has a whole blog post. I think it's something like 100 types of asset allocations that are better than yours or something like that. But check it out. We'll talk at the very end too about different types of financial advisors and how to like vet through them if you just don't have an interest and this is just something that you're kind of starting and not really sure kind of anything about. But let's talk about taxes in that same respect. So, what even are taxes? I mean, how many of you grew up and then learned specifically how income taxes work or capital gains taxes work? Outside of maybe like getting a business degree, honestly, I never learned these things in school. And so, what do they even mean? I mean, taxes are things that are charged on lots of stuff. There's sales tax, there's Medicare tax, Social Security tax. First time you get a paycheck, you're like, oh my gosh. But we're talking about income taxes here. So how do they even work? Well, let's use an example. Let's say you're a single person and you make $10,000. Well, you look at this bracket, you fall between the 0 and 11,925, and that tax bracket says 10%. So a federal tax on that would be 10% of that $10,000. So your take home basically is $9,000. Kind of makes sense? All right, let's use another example. Let's say for physicians, you make $280,000. Okay. Does that mean you pay 35% on $280,000? No. That means on the first 11,925, you pay 10%. On the money between 11,926 and 48,475, you pay 12%. On the money between 48,476 and 103,350, you pay 22%. And so that's the difference. If you've ever heard marginal tax rate versus like what tax bracket you're in, that's what that means. So, why do retirement accounts kind of matter? Let's say you have what's called a tax deferred account. That's things like a 403b, a 401k. Why is this important for especially high income individuals? Well, let's say you're making 280,000 and you put in, we'll just say 20,000 for easy math into a 401k for a single filer. You don't pay taxes on the money you put into a 401k right now. You pay it later when you take it out, hopefully, presumably when you're not working. And there are different exceptions to these things. You'll see all kinds of reasons why you should or shouldn't do it. But 401ks in general are great. You see a lot of other people saying that they're not. Take it with a huge grain of salt. Don't even take my word for it. There's plenty of resources at the end, which we'll talk about. Look at the money guys. They're uh, financial planners, um, you know, accountants, people that explain exactly why these things are so important. But one of the reasons is because from 280,000, now let's say 260,000 you get taxed on. If you look at the bracket, in the 250,000 to $626,000 that you're going to get taxed at 35%, you just instantly saved 35%. And if your employer matches, which means they give you money just for putting it in there, that's a guaranteed 100%, potentially, of their matched money that they're putting in there for you too. So it's hugely beneficial to start utilizing these tax structures. Now, what's a long-term capital gains tax rate? What does that even mean? Look at the single one again. Let's say you hold an asset for more than a year. So let's say you hold any stock, call it VTI. You have it for a year. And then you go and you retire. And you go to take it out. Well, now for the first 30 grand, let's say you want to take out that year, you don't owe taxes on it at all. Up to 44,625. I mean, the tax rates, even if you took out 500 grand, you're getting taxed at 20% on all monies over 492,000, I should say. And between 44,000 ish and 492,000 ish, you only get taxed 15%. I mean, that is unbelievable. And so, some of these things, I mean, the government puts restrictions on how much you can put in because it is something that can be easily taken advantage of by extra wealthy individuals. So whenever they put a restriction on what you can put money into, it's usually a pretty good thing. And this is specifically the reason. So it's something that if you're not utilizing these, like 401k, 403bs, if you have access to them, you really should think about it as part of your portfolio. Now, again, we talked about 401ks and 403bs. IRAs, Roth IRAs, different things. What's an IRA? An individual retirement arrangement. Some people say account, but what these things are vehicles that you can put more money into. I mean, once you make much money up to a certain limit, you can't really get like a tax break for it, but otherwise you typically can. Roth IRAs are something that you can put money into after tax. What does that mean? So you got your paycheck because it's got to be earned income for these, and you made X amount of money. Well, then you can put that money directly into a Roth IRA. And then when you take it out, you know, 30 years later, it's all tax free. You owe nothing on the extra gains. Well, they also have limits on how much money you can put in, but also an income limit on can you even directly contribute to this at all. And this is where, if you've ever heard of what's called the backdoor Roth IRA, what that actually ends up meaning uh, for beneficial use for what to do. So, another term for backdoor Roth is actually just technically a Roth conversion. What does that mean? So, you take money, you put it into a traditional IRA. Even same day, I mean, usually think about waiting at least a day for it, but you don't really technically have to. You can take that money and convert it to a Roth IRA for the full amount of that year, regardless of income limits. So if you're over the amount that you can directly contribute to a Roth IRA, you can open a traditional IRA, fully fund that, convert it the next day to a Roth IRA, and then invest it almost as if you had done just a contribution to your Roth. Um, this has been a known legal strategy for a very long time. Uh, and the other thing about this is is it's just kind of unbelievable. I think they allowed this to happen back in like 2010, as far as I remember. Um, but you want to try to do this just to avoid headaches. I would try to do it in the same calendar year so that when you're doing it for your next year taxes, you don't run into issues. Most importantly, though, you can't have other SEP, simple, or traditional IRAs. I think technically, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, you could have an inherited IRA, but eventually you're going to have to take distributions from that. But if you have a SEP, simple, or traditional IRA, and you have any money in there, otherwise that means like it's not a $0 balance at the end of the year, you would trigger this pro rata calculation, which effectively you get taxed on the money that still is in there too. So you really don't want to mess that up. It is a very simple thing to do once you do it, but you just want to make sure that you're putting a lot of time and understanding before you do it the first time so that you don't make the mistake of having monies or just doing the conversion wrong. You can do this yourself, even on TurboTax when you enter it in the next year. White Coat Investor, again, has a walkthrough guide on how to even do that. But usually, when you start nearing this step, your taxes are probably starting to get complicated enough where you might want to have the help of a tax professional at some point. So, again, think about that in the future. Pensions. What are pensions? Those are all the things that companies had for people before 401ks got wild. And basically, your employer puts money into a separate account for you every pay. And then when you retire, basically it's like your own retirement account. Uh, they're great. Not a lot of places have them anymore. Whether or not they're actually like guaranteed is another thing too. Government pensions are great, but a lot of companies, I'd be a little wary of them as well. 457Bs, there's different types of those as well. Those are other deferred compensation. And again, we're talking about high income, usually physician providers. You can defer only so much in 401ks and 403Bs. And there's total limits to that too, including matching. Well, 457s have their own limits too that are separate outside of 401k limits that you can put extra money in. There's some specific differences. You want to make sure that you're doing it, I mean, through a government 457, that's wonderful. But outside of a government, you want your company to be pretty huge because technically, if they ever were to go under, the money in there is subject to their creditors. Just make sure you know and understand all of the limitations of these, and there are differences on when you have to take the money out and different restrictions on these things too. I put in briefly Canadian RRSP. Um, if you are a provider, let's say in residency or not, um, that has is in the U.S. for your training, just gonna say that a lot of these things, a lot of the investments, even through Fidelity, not all other companies can do. You can hold assets that are found in the United States, but majority of them can be transferred through the Canadian RRSP. Usually, you pay a penalty for it. Again, I'm just going to speak very briefly on that, but if you're thinking about it in your training, um, and you have a match through your residency, might be something to consider, as more likely than not, the match money is going to be more than the penalty that you would incur from switching if you ever decided to move back. There's different countries, there's different restrictions there. Again, look into yours if you need to. And then other things, other types of account, brokerage account. That's just a regular stock account. That's usually what people think about when they think about like, oh, I own stocks. Usually it's in a brokerage account. Um, but this is something that you put money in. When you sell an asset, you pay taxes on the gains. How much? Well, it depends if you're working, depends if you held the asset for more than a year, things like that. There's other strategies called tax loss harvesting, which we can get into just very briefly in a second. But but that is a different type of account you should at least be aware of if you've never heard of before. Health savings account, HSAs, those are great. If you pull it out for qualified medical expenses, then it's something that can be really beneficial as well. Um, and there's a lot of tax savings involved with these things. There's FSAs, which are a little bit different, flex spending accounts, but if you don't use the money by the end of the calendar year, you usually lose it. So you have to be more on top of it with that. HSAs are almost like some people will call them stealth IRAs because they're things that can get carried forward, and medical expenses are just increasing as we age. So, not a bad idea to have that adequately funded if you're able to. You have to have a high deductible plan in order to do it. There's reasons why or why you should not choose high deductible plans when your yearly kind of selections come about. Like if you're gonna have like a kid in that calendar year, or you got like a big surgery or something planned, maybe go with the more deluxe insurance that year, but something to also consider. And then 529s, college savings. I mean, again, plenty of types of different accounts, but if you use them for schooling, and now that definition keeps getting expanded and expanded, uh, they can grow basically in the stock market, and you can take it out and enjoy some of those gains to hopefully help offset the cost of education in the future. So let's talk about insurance here too. So, firstly, what is insurance? Insurance is something that you pay for uh, to avoid catastrophe. I mean, basically, in the most basic sense, there are different types that I want to discuss. Long term disability insurance. What is that? So, if you get hurt and you can't work, more than a certain amount of time. Usually the policies kick in maybe 6 months, 9 months, depends on the policy. Short term kicks in before long term. But let's say you're disabled to the point where you can't work anymore, then it's important to have this insurance. And usually I would think about buying this outside of work because a lot of times you're going to get specific selections. And for physicians, this is important. Own occupation is something that you really should get or consider. What does that mean? So let's say you get injured. Let's say you're a surgeon. Not to keep saying surgery, but say you're a surgeon, you're in a car accident, and you smash your hands. All right? Everything else works fine, but you can't really hold a scalpel well, and you can't do what you used to do. Well, are you disabled? For other jobs, maybe not. I mean, like, could you even like hold a shovel or do something else? Could you go and take orders somewhere? Could you greet people? I mean, if the answer is yes, then a lot of insurances would not say that you're disabled. But could you do surgery any longer? If you can't, that's where this is extremely important. So that means you can't do your job that you got specialized training in order to do. So you can go work somewhere else, but you still get to collect insurance disability for that job. Now, this insurance, frankly, is very expensive. What do I mean by very expensive? Maybe 10 grand a year, 7 grand a year. Depends how much you get. There's a list of different rider options. These are the options that probably should be included on, again, the White Coat Investor. Really think about looking at that. Take a lot of time in order to look at those things. Um, Term life insurance. Uh, what is that? If you die, then you get insurance. Your beneficiaries get paid out a certain amount of money. Is this important? Yeah. I mean, if somebody depends on your income, if it's just you and all your debt's going to go away if you die, I wouldn't worry about it. But if you've got anybody that depends on your salary at all, then it's something you really should get. I know people went through Policy Genius. They will compare, call them the big five, but basically the largest, like most reputable insurance companies. They also do this for long-term disability as well. Um, but there are other companies that do this. I believe Xander, there's some other ones that get thrown around. It's hard to go direct to these companies, so it's something that I would do. So, not gonna lie, it was a challenging process when we went through it, but it's worth it to do. Uh, so look into that. You could get all of the disability, just jumping back to short term quickly, to cover your salary. You might get only up to half if you have another high income provider person in your family. Maybe you don't need to insure because your insurance is basically them. But there's different ways you can do this, and none of which necessarily are wrong. You probably just don't want to have a underinsured policy for whatever your goals are. Ladder policy. So if you buy, I mean, you might need realistically, let's say $2 million of life insurance, depending on, do you have a house? Do you have different insurance things? Do you have to save? Do you have to save for kids' college? You have, there's different rules of thumb for X times the amount your income that people will throw around too. But you might want a fair amount of money to make sure that your people that you care about are going to be taken care of. Term life is a lot less expensive than long-term disability, substantially less, a tenth the price or less. But other ways to make it cheaper, potentially, you could do what's called a ladder policy. So let's say you wanted $2 million for 25 years. Well, are you going to need $2 million in 18 years or 15 years when you have more and more assets and you can kind of self-insure? Probably not. So you could split that up. You could put, let's say, like a $2 million policy for 10 years, and then maybe $1 million policy for 20 years, and then maybe a $500,000 policy for 25 years, something like that. And that can lower the cost, and they start falling off when you start accumulating more assets. But the earlier you get these things, the healthier you are when these things occur, will be better. You'll be less money. Sometimes there's pre-existing things where it's very challenging to get approved for some of these things. There's different insurance that might do it, but they might do it at a very high cost to you. So, um, the earlier you can do it, where doing it as healthy as possible, it's going to be beneficial. Whole life insurance, should you get it? No. Not to be so blunt. I mean, are there very small specific instances where this is okay? I even have like a little video on this. Maybe, but it's probably not for you. What is whole life or universal life? Or there's different terms for it, and they're structured a little differently, things like that too. But basically, they'll say, yeah, we'll give you life insurance. It'll cost you, I don't know, 3 grand a month, something like that. But also, it's an investment because you get a guaranteed 5% on your money. Okay. Uh, is that good? Even in down years. Well, usually the market goes up more often than not, 8 out of 10 years historically, not to say that that will continue in the future. But on those years where it goes up 20% or 30%, you get 5%. And that's specifically the reason why. You saw the annualized average return of the S&P 500 was 10 to 12%. If you're getting 5% and you're spending a ton more money on insurance, you're going to have to work longer than you would have otherwise. And so, again, some very specific situations. But if they're using a lot of confusing terms to talk to you about things, if they're more of a product to be sold than anything else, um, stay very wary of those products. And they might use different terms for them. But basically, if insurance and an investment is put together in general, they're usually not as good versions of both. And then auto and home insurance. What is what is that? I mean, everybody knows you have to have auto insurance, you have to have home insurance. Um, but there's different things you might want to do. You might want to have, if your state offers it, unlimited coverage for auto insurance, maybe a higher policy because you might be more likely to face litigation. Certain specialties are less likely to than others. Um, but it's something to really think about. Home insurance. Do you have like replaces new at your home? Do you have enough insurance? There's different policy that can be bundled together that can save money. But just think about some of those things when you go to get it. Umbrella coverage. This is what I would say too. Something I would get. It's called personal liability and coverage. It's, let's say the policy limit outside of your home or auto gets reached or you get sued for some other reason outside of it. Um, this is an additional insurance on top of that. In general, a good rule is get seven figures. So get at least $1 million. It's not very expensive. Um, and it's something that you want to have. Why a million or more? Um, Basically, the thought is then the insurance might actually mount a decent defense for you. And so I'd really think about doing that. Here's some other types of insurance, and this is specifically for physicians for work. So there's something called claims made insurance. What is that? Claims made basically is if at any time you are actively practicing, say you have a 3-year contract and you're practicing and somebody sues you inside of the time you're currently practicing, you're covered. They have different policy limits. 1 million, 3 million is a common thing you'll see. Sometimes it can be higher, but you get covered basically if you're actively working. However, let's say you move on from that job or you quit or retire, and then the next day somebody lands a suit against you. Uh, you're no longer covered under claims made. You have to basically effectively buy something called a tail coverage. What is tail? So tail will cover you from when you were practicing up to the statutes, usually of limitations for each of the potential suits that were to be brought against you. Claims made plus tail is effectively occurrence. That's any time you're ever sued for anything that you're doing, you would have coverage for. Why does this matter? I mean, going back to contracts, seeing if they cover this, are you on the hook for this if you leave early? I mean, there's lots of things to think about, but claims made is relatively actually inexpensive. And by that, it might be like 15 grand a year. But the tail insurance is very expensive. It's at least 3 times usually an annualized claims made policy. So if you're leaving a place and you have to pay for tail insurance or tail coverage if you were to leave, depending on what your contract says, or if you have to buy it yourself, it might be 45 grand. It might be 60 grand. And so, again, partly understanding, thinking about getting a contract reviewer is an important thing to do. Student loans. All right, let's talk about this for a second. So let's say you're in the US, there's different government programs. They used to have repay or pay or different types of income driven things. Then they went to save, which is getting challenged in court, which will obviously seems like very likely get shut down. Um, we don't really know what's going to happen with that. Now, if you have private insurance, it's a no-brainer depending on your percentage. Pay those down as fast as you can. The White Coat Investor says live like a resident for 3 to 5 years. Really don't inflate your lifestyle a whole lot and just dump as much money as you can and eliminate student loans. But if you're going for something like PSLF, the Student Loan Forgiveness Program, and you work for 10 years at a qualifying institution, like a nonprofit, they have uh, the 501c3 exemption, all that stuff. Um, and then, after 125 qualifying payments, could potentially get forgiven tax free. So if it's something that you're going for, fortunately, you kind of have to hang tight. Uh, Student loan advice is something I have not personally used, but I've heard good things about. But there's different ways that you can potentially set yourself up depending on what program you're going to be trying to use. Now there's questions, will this go away? Maybe. It might not. I would say it's probably unlikely to, as PSLF was an act of Congress. There's some question on would you get grandfathered in, which seems more likely than not, but ultimately you don't know. And so one of the things is building up a side fund, they would say. if you're going to go for PSLF. So putting into like a high yield savings or even an investment, depending on how long you have, might not be a bad thing too. So, other types of loans. Home loans. Can you go get a home loan? Sure. There's something called a physician mortgage loan too, if you're not aware. You'll see other people again talk about, oh, you should have 20%. One good rule of thumb we'll talk about in a second is 3 to 5% down for your first home. But with a physician mortgage loan, you can put down 0%, depending on if they allow that. A lot of places will. As long as you show them a contract for X amount of money, um, they might offer you 0% and it avoids PMI, which is private mortgage insurance. Usually, people have to pay basically a premium. They give them extra money, so they help potentially recoup the costs of the loan if it goes sideways for the banks. If you don't have at least 20%, that eventually can go away. But once you hit the 20%, but think about interest and, you know, possibly trying to buy points or other things, depending on what rate it could give you. Here's a good rule of thumb, not just for physicians, basically for everyone. Uh, it should try to be your mortgage payment less than 25% of your gross income. So that's easier said than done too when trying to get into a house, especially with home rates rising so incredibly high and fast over the last few years. But so many people are living like 40%, 50% of their paychecks going to their mortgage, and I feel bad. They're what's called house poor. And they're hard to get out of those things too, especially if you have a low interest rate. But if you do less than 25%, you will feel like you have room to breathe. Um, would try to put down some money on your first house, but again, you don't have to. Sometimes physician mortgage loans carry a little bit higher interest than otherwise you would have, but not always. And then for auto loans, this is a Money Guide Direct 23-8 rule. What does that mean? So try to put down 20%. Don't finance it longer than 3 years, and don't have it be more than 8% of your take home pay for your car payment. I mean, if you could do same as cash, I probably would. But those are things to think about. And that does not apply to luxury vehicles either. Luxury vehicles are say same as cash. So if you're going out and you're buying, you know, Lamborghini or something, first off, probably don't do that. But if you really want to, if that's your thing, uh, you should save up cash to buy something like that. Here's a real world scenario. Something that's very, very realistic that you could do. Max your 401ks, do your backdoor Roth IRAs. You could fund 529s. You can put more money outside of those into a brokerage account. Because you have to get, if you're going to do 10 grand a month somewhere, put into a high yield savings, excuse me, for different emergency funds or projects or other things. What do you want to invest in? Again, anything really, but VTI, VTSAX, there's plenty of different ETFs and mutual funds. You can do bonds too. They can be different percentages of your portfolio. Where and when you put them is something you could think about too. Could you do this early in your career? Probably not. But the more you get into it, you definitely can and should be doing some of these things. I know somebody's done a 7 year ARM, adjustable rate mortgage, at a very low percentage on a 30-year fixed with a ceiling cap on the total amount the interest could go up after the ARM. Umbrella policy, again, that extra liability insurance over their auto insurance. A limited term term disability in addition to a laddered term life policy. Uh, if they're in the SAVE programs going for PSLF, trying to tax loss harvest from their brokerage account, which basically is like selling assets at a loss and then buying a similar asset, although not substantially identical, in the words of the IRS, either same or next day. And then you can carry forward losses and even take some of those losses off your income up to $3,000 can be claimed. Saves you about, I want to say, about $1,000 in taxes per year, but they can be carried forward in perpetuity. Um, if you're charitably minded, you could give through a donor advised fund, so try to flush out capital gains. And again, this is kind of getting into the weeds here. Really, start with the basics, kind of understand what is going on. Make sure you also have some like wills set up if you have people that depend on you, in addition to these insurances, and try to set it up as automated as possible. If you want to manually put it in to a brokerage or 401k or something like that, fine. But having this on autopilot, will help build your wealth. Having it just get taken out of your account on a monthly basis, regardless of the amount. Again, going back to kind of the mission of the channel, it could be 25 bucks a week. So you don't even see it. You don't even feel that you have that. It's in a totally separate account that one day you'll look at decades later, uh, and hopefully it gets auto invested for you. And you just have enough to have a dignified retirement, is really the goal. It's not the goal to have excess. Money is a tool to accomplish what you want to do. It's not, the goal is not to have, how can I have the most at the end? Because none of this can be taken with you. So, really see what your goals are. There's different calculators to find out. There's what's called the Know Your Number calculator on the Money Guys. There's all these different resources out there. But some of it too is for this channel is to point you to some of the good guys so that you can look into this further as well. Let's just talk very briefly about what a work RVU is, what an RVU is, things like that, and what production model for medicine is and what it looks like. So salary, everybody knows what a salary is. You work, you say I'm gonna work this amount of days or hours or whatever. I'm gonna get this much money for it. Okay, that's fine. But you might make, let's say you make 250,000. Let's say you make 300,000, something like that. And you have no control over your schedule. Say you work 5 days a week, 40 hours a week. Say this is outpatient primary care. And you have to see every 15 minutes for, 9 straight hours. Well, let's say you get an hour plunge, but eight hours a day, 40 hours a week. Um, so 4 times 8, you see 32 people a day, 5 days a week, and you're making that much money. I mean, there are other situations and scenarios where it's not that extreme, but it could be. Well, what's the production model? Well, you get paid a certain amount of money per patient you see. What's an example? You can look these up. If you get billed a 99213 or versus a 99214, different types of office visits versus a Medicare wellness visit is a different amount versus a transition of care from the hospital. It is correlated to a certain amount of work RVUs. And most people's contracts will have a dollar amount that the work RVU represents. Certain specialties it's higher, certain specialties it's lower. I just put a very average example. Depending on the state you live in or the specialty you're in, um, even specifically like are you in a rural area versus not area of the country, things like that, it can all vary. But in this example, let's say you saw 18 patients in a day for 5 days a week, and you on average build 1.92 work RVUs per person. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. Say you work 46 weeks out of the year because of vacation, holidays, and other things. You multiply that by whatever your conversion factor is, that dollar amount. In that example that I put, that would be how much you would earn yearly. And so you can see how that can sometimes go off the rails. This is where people, understandably, um, could be upset with different types of like billing and things and other things. I mean, in the hospital, it's wild, you know? Remember when got a bill for $45,000. Insurance covered it, thankfully. If you don't have insurance, should insurance be tied to employment, other things? Different conversation. The answer is no, but feel free to argue otherwise. But usually, in at least the production model, a lot of times you might not have to pay back your first year if you don't hit your what's called your floor of your work RVUs, because you might earn a base salary that's substantially less and get the amount that's over that in a bonus, either paid out quarterly or yearly. But you should ask people that work there, how long did it take you to hit production before you started earning over the floor? Did it take 6 months? Did it take a year? You know, kind of weigh those things when you're looking into employment too. And so here's some resources. So the Money Guys, again, at least entertaining, but also full of educational value. Um, can be pretty much for everybody. White Coat Investors, specifically for physicians or high income individuals. I put Dave Ramsey very small because take a huge grain of salt with what they say. Outside of like getting out of debt, if you just struggle and you cannot get out of debt and you have wild credit card debt, maybe consider it. And I also put them because we use their investment calculator. Uh, I like the interface of that the most. Caleb Hammer, kind of a guilty pleasure. He builds budgets for people. He tells people how to get out of debt too. Um, Super entertaining. Pretty wild stuff on there. So check those out for resources. But then, most importantly, too, don't feel like you have to do this yourself. If this was overwhelming, if you had no idea what I was talking about, even in the beginning with taxes, I mean, I think it's worth it to look into and learn a little bit more about this. But it's something that really finding a good fiduciary, that means they're on the hook if they mess you over, financial advisor is something that's great. If you want nothing to do with this at all, they're probably going to charge you an AUM fee, which is assets under management. Um, Pretty standard for the industry right now is like 1% up to $1 million, which, it is what it is. Instead of doing those calculations with 8 or 9%, knock it down a percentage. But if they are going to get you a higher return than you would have yourself, it might be worth it. Plus, then you don't have to do anything about this. Once you're over $1 million, they usually cut the fee because, I mean, if you think about one percentage of like $10 million, it's pretty substantial. But that's usually how these things play out. If you need a good list, again, the White Coat Investor right in the middle there, they have a good list of fiduciary financial advisors. The Money Guys themselves have a company, they are fiduciary financial advisors, so you could consider them too. But again, there is a list for the White Coat Investor as well. And then hopefully this channel can provide some help too. Trying to put out some more videos. It has been a while since the last one, but hopefully it's somewhat beneficial. And again, watching this channel continue to grow um, is what we'll see and what we'll continue to do. And then that's it for this presentation. But here's our bonus. Gonna stick around to see the update on the increase for the pile of money. So I'm gonna get off of here. Gonna open this up and go ahead and we will open. Oh no, not gonna open an account. Login. Bop. All right, I'm gonna pause this for a second and enter the stuff. And boom, we are in. So you've seen it's actually grown a fair amount. Let's look at the performance here. And wow, rate of return 19.2%. That is pretty great. Again, just by keeping that money in here, uh, you're making way more than if you're going to keep it somewhere else. Could this have easily went down? Yeah, I mean, at the start it did. You're just seeing the point in times. Will it go down again? Almost certainly. Will it continue to go up again? Almost certainly. So we will see. But then we're going to talk about what we would do next. And so, as far as what we are going to do next, if you've seen this before, we're going to buy VTI. Let's go ahead and click it. And then it's going to pop up with this whenever it's going to go through. And it's already up to this much per share. If you look back at how much it was when we first started this, it gained quite a bit. So let me enter the information in 1 second. Video magic. This is how much we have. So $25 a week. Haven't really been investing it. It's just been sitting in the sweep fund, which is a money market fund. So still been earning some interest, but hopefully now can invest it again. Just doing the dollars because that's exactly what I have. So we'll buy a partial share. We'll preview this, bop, and then we will hit submit. And that should be all set. So I just wanted to thank everybody who ever made it to this end in the video. If there are other specific topics that you want me to do a little bit of a deeper dive into, please let me know in the comments. Please give this video a like and consider subscribing as it really does help the channel. And thanks, and I hope you're doing well.